In November 1927, along Fifth Avenue in New York City, a demolition team pulled up at the intersection with 57th Street. Their objective was the biggest private dwelling ever erected in Manhattan, 130 rooms spanning a full city block, once the residence of Cornelius Vanderbilt II, the Commodore's grandson who helped forge America's vast railroad network. For 45 years, this structure had endured. It resembled a French Renaissance castle uprooted and replanted on U.S. ground, featuring limestone facades, intricate stone carvings, and lavish interiors adorned with gold leaf and marble. It was the sort of estate that proclaimed riches so boldly it echoed through the surrounding streets. Yet now it faced demolition, not due to flames or collapse, but simply because it had lost its appeal. The family could no longer shoulder the 30,000 yearly property taxes. The era that spawned such extravagances had drawn to a close. The Gilded Age kicked off in the 1870s as industrial tycoons amassed fortunes that birthed a fresh breed of American elite: railroad tycoons, steel lords, oil magnates. These figures constructed Fifth Avenue fortresses to challenge European monarchs, hosted galas that drained hundreds of thousands, amassed artwork, wed their offspring to titled Europeans, and indulged in luxuries unimaginable to most citizens. Come the 1920s, that chapter concluded. Those grand homes gave way to retail emporiums and high-rises. Inheritances faced heavy levies. The societal framework propping it up crumbled amid World War pressures, reformist pushes, and evolving U.S. ideals. This tale chronicles the Gilded Age's demise, not through one dramatic blow, but via years of strain from union drives, investigative reporters, lawmakers, and harsh financial truths. A realm rooted in disparity couldn't endure once those at its base grew weary of their lot. If you're drawn to in-depth explorations of U.S. history and design, think about subscribing or becoming a channel member for exclusive access. We delve into the dynamics that shaped and unraveled America's most iconic eras and properties. We'll start with the demolition phase. Chapter 1. The moment Cornelius Vanderbilt's stronghold tumbled, the Vanderbilt estate claimed the whole expanse between Fifth Avenue and Madison, from 57th to 58th Street. Its 130 chambers extended over several levels, making it, by all accounts, the grandest personal abode ever raised in New York City. Cornelius Vanderbilt II commissioned it in 1882, not the pioneering Commodore who originated the wealth, but his descendant. When young Cornelius came of age, the family legacy evoked railroads, which translated to incalculable riches. The residence embodied that opulence. Crafted by prominent New York architect George B. Post, construction ran over $3 million, roughly $90 million in modern terms. The facade evoked French chateau aesthetics, with limestone sheathing, pitched rooftops, and ornate stonework blanketing every inch. It evoked a scene from the Loire Valley. The interiors surpassed it in splendor, a soaring three-story entrance hall lined with etched oak panels and stained glass panes. The dance hall fit crowds of hundreds. A double-height library housed priceless volumes. The formal dining space welcomed scores under ceilings laced with gilt. Each chamber vied to eclipse the rest through marble expanses, gilded accents, rare timbers, and masterful flourishes. Cornelius II passed away in 1899 at 55, apparently exhausted from overseeing the clan's rail operations. His spouse, Alice, stayed on in the house. She upheld the estate, the household employees, and the elite duties tied to Vanderbilt status. The soirees persisted, the dances, the suppers. The mansion stayed a hub of Manhattan's upper crust. Still, shifts were underway. Even prior to the Great War, upkeep for such properties turned burdensome. Urban levies rose as officials valued these behemoths accurately. Labor expenses mounted with servants seeking fairer pay. Fuel, repairs, and care all demanded endless outlays. The conflict hastened the transformation. Labor gaps crippled efforts to retain big retinues. Prospective valets and stewards enlisted in Europe. Would-be housemaids opted for lucrative plant jobs. The circuit of lavish hospitality started seeming outdated, even vulgar, amid the overseas carnage. Alice Vanderbilt resided there until 1926, by which point she was in her 80s. The place had swollen beyond the needs of a lone senior, staff notwithstanding. The The district evolved as well. Retail structures supplanted fellow estates. Fifth Avenue shifted from homes to commerce. Upon Alice's death, her successors confronted a choice: retain the property or offload it. Just the taxes hit $30,000 each year. Factor in warmth, power, routine fixes, a skeleton crew, and upkeep topped $100,000 annually. To offset that, an occupant would have to dwell there full-time. Such residency required 30 to 50 attendants, piling on another $100,000 or so in payroll costs yearly. No relative desired the younger Vanderbilts favored compact townhomes or sleek apartments equipped with up-to-date amenities. They maintained rural properties for weekend getaways. A sprawling urban fortress that devoured funds no longer suited their needs. The estate hit the sales block. It was listed at $7 million, encompassing both the plot and the structure. Potential purchasers seeking a personal home never materialized. The spot proved too prime for residential use alone. Positioned as top-tier commercial territory right in Manhattan's core, it drew commercial interest. Bergdorf Goodman, the upscale retailer, snapped up the site. Their focus was solely on the acreage. The edifice itself served no purpose beyond demolition. Come 1927, the demolition teams rolled in. They began from the summit, stripping away the slate shingles, then dismantling the higher levels, progressing downward while recovering usable elements where feasible. The ornate limestone exterior, the marble fireplaces, the oak wainscoting. Certain pieces were preserved and auctioned to enthusiasts. The bulk ended up discarded in dumps. City dwellers observed the teardown with conflicted emotions. A few grieved the vanishing of an iconic site. Many viewed it as unavoidable advancement. The residents embodied a bygone period that seemed ever more remote. Just 45 years prior, during its construction, the U.S. lacked income taxes, worker protections, or caps on elite fortunes. That era had faded away. The teardown spanned months, with dailies reporting on it consistently. Images captured the gradual crumble into debris, the chateau exterior pierced by voids once filled with panes, inner chambers laid bare to the elements, the majestic stairway ascending to nothing. In the end, only a barren parcel remained where one of the nation's grandest dwellings had once risen. Bergdorf Goodman erected a fresh flagship there, featuring Art Deco flair with crisp contours and expansive showroom glass. This fresh construction signaled shifting priorities. Trade eclipsed nobility. Contemporary streamlined operations outshone Gilded Age extravagance, and broad shopper entry supplanted elite seclusion. The Vanderbilt abode wasn't the initial casualty. By 1927, various other Fifth Avenue grand residences had already met the wrecker's ball, yet this one stood as the grandest and most emblematic. When the mightiest home crafted by one of America's wealthiest clans couldn't endure, it solidified a widespread notion. The Gilded Age had conclusively concluded. The puzzle lingers. Why? Which pressures dismantled a societal and financial framework that appeared unshakable merely decades before? Grasping the conclusion demands revisiting the origins. How did the Gilded Age emerge? What forged the landscape enabling clans like the Vanderbilts to erect opulent halls amid laboring masses' privation? The explanation traces back 50 years amid the fallout from the nation's most lethal strife. Chapter 2. The railroad and steel magnates of the 1870s. The Civil War concluded in April 1865. 4 years of combat had claimed more than 600,000 lives. The South remained in ruins. The North prevailed. Yet triumph sparked fresh dilemmas. What form would the reunited nation take? The response steamed in on iron tracks. Pre-war America comprised disjointed local economies. The Northeast produced manufactures. The South cultivated cotton. The West stretched vast and vacant. Linking them demanded sluggish, costly transport. Canals aided somewhat, though they iced over seasonally. Pathways were abysmal. Hauling merchandise over distances stretched into weeks or months. Conflict altered this dynamic. Each faction had relied heavily on locomotives for wartime logistics. The Union, in particular, showcased rail's prowess in shuttling forces and provisions at unprecedented speeds. Commanders adept in supply chains secured victories. Supply chains equated to rail. Post-war, such tactical expertise transformed into entrepreneurial prospects. If rails could transport legions, they could convey any cargo, crops, livestock, metals, fuel, passengers. The nation merely required a web of lines binding every point to every other. In 1869, a remarkable milestone occurred. Crews from two rival firms advancing from contrary coasts linked up in Utah. The cross-country route stood finished. Passengers could journey from New York to San Francisco wholly via rail. A trek once spanning half a year by caravan now lasted 6 days. The effects rippled swiftly and profoundly. The West shed its seclusion overnight. Growers dispatched grain to Atlantic ports, herders funneled herds to Chicago markets, prospectors hauled minerals to refineries, settlements burgeoned beside the routes, barren grasslands yielded to cultivated fields. No longer a patchwork of zones, the land unified into a single cohesive economy. Constructing that vast network demanded immense funding, beyond any single person's reach. Thus, firms issued shares and debt to backers. Savvy supporters reaped windfalls as projects thrived, with some tycoons amassing sway over numerous lines, weaving interstate empires. Cornelius Vanderbilt, dubbed the Commodore, pioneered the vision of rail unification. He had amassed wealth via steamboats in maritime trade. During the 1860s, he pivoted to locomotives, not forging fresh routes, but acquiring established ones and fusing them into cohesive grids. By the 1870s, Vanderbilt dominated the New York Central. Linking New York, Vanderbilt commanded an extensive network of railroads connecting New York to Chicago, along with routes extending to Buffalo, Albany, and numerous other urban centers. His operation transported goods and travelers with greater speed and effectiveness than rival outfits. Such streamlined operations generated substantial earnings. Those earnings elevated Vanderbilt to the ranks of America's wealthiest individuals. Upon his death in 1877, his estate was valued at more than $100 million, a sum that, adjusted for inflation, exceeds $2 billion today, marking the greatest fortune amassed by any American until then. He bequeathed the bulk of it to his son William, who surpassed even him in expanding the family's assets. Yet railroads represented only a single avenue for prosperity. The burgeoning rail system spurred needs in supporting sectors. Laying tracks demanded vast amounts of steel, with endless stretches of rail enduring constant wear and requiring frequent renewal. Andrew Carnegie recognized this potential. Having immigrated from Scotland and begun as a telegraph operator, Carnegie advanced through positions in rail administration. He gained deep insights into the industry's mechanics, its requirements, and its key obstacles. During the 1870s, he pivoted from transport to manufacturing steel. He established enormous factories near Pittsburgh, equipped with cutting-edge techniques like the Bessemer method, enabling quicker and more affordable steel output compared to traditional approaches. Carnegie's plants operated with remarkable productivity, yielding massive volumes at reduced expenses relative to rivals. Beyond mere production, Carnegie oversaw the entire supply chain. He acquired iron ore deposits in Minnesota, coal fields in Pennsylvania, vessels for hauling ore via the Great Lakes, and additional rail routes to deliver resources to his facilities. This approach to vertical consolidation ensured independence from external suppliers. Consequently, every possible revenue from the steel trade remained within Carnegie's enterprise. By the 1880s, his steel operations led the nation's output. The firm's revenues were astonishing. Carnegie's personal riches grew to levels challenging Vanderbilt's. Oil emerged as another nascent field, scarcely developed prior to the Civil War. In 1859, Pennsylvania saw the drilling of the inaugural commercial oil well. At first, oil served primarily as kerosene for illumination, supplanting costly whale oil. Even that niche market proved lucrative. John D. Rockefeller grasped a nuance that eluded many. True value lay not in extraction, which carried high risks. Wells often yielded nothing or oversupplied the market, driving down prices. Instead, fortunes arose from processing and marketing. In 1870, Rockefeller launched Standard Oil. The firm purchased raw crude from producers, converted it into kerosene, and supplied it to vendors. He secured confidential agreements with railroads for preferential freight costs. By slashing prices, he drove competitors into insolvency or acquisition. He absorbed rival processing plants, merging them into a colossal entity. By 1882, Standard Oil held about 90% of U.S. refining capacity. It functioned as a de facto monopoly, and soon a formal one. Rockefeller structured his assets as a trust, a mechanism allowing oversight of diverse firms while maintaining their nominal independence. This arrangement positioned Rockefeller as America's premier tycoon, surpassing Vanderbilt and Carnegie in wealth. Peak valuations placed his fortune at over $400 billion in modern terms, the largest ever held by an American. Figures like Vanderbilt, Carnegie, Rockefeller, and their peers forged extraordinary wealth accumulations. Their ascent was swift. Vanderbilt's empire rose over 2 decades, Carnegie's in just 1, and Rockefeller's even more rapidly. They thrived amid virtually unregulated conditions. Income taxes arrived only in 1913, antitrust measures in 1890. Labor safeguards were absent, as were mandates for safe working environments or caps on labor duration. Businesses operated with few constraints. Employees lacked any shields. Job-related injuries fell squarely on the worker. Dismissal offered no appeal. Pay reductions forced acceptance or resignation. Joblessness spelled poverty. No social supports existed, no aid programs, no jobless benefits. Survival hinged on employment, otherwise hardship loomed. This blend of explosive industrial expansion and absent oversight generated riches at an unprecedented pace in history. Yet it also bred disparities America had never witnessed. The uppermost 1% controlled more assets than the lower 90% together. Elites resided in opulent mansions, while the destitute crowded into squalid housing lacking basic sanitation or warmth. Robber baron became the label for such magnates, with detractors claiming they amassed holdings via monopolistic tactics, graft, and labor abuses. Supporters dubbed them captains of industry, crediting them with erecting the frameworks that propelled America's economic dominance. Each label captured elements of reality. These leaders constructed vast rail systems, steelworks, and fuel processors that reshaped the nation. U.S. manufacturing surged, urban areas expanded, quality of life improved for countless people. However, gains flowed disproportionately to the elite in particular. The leaders at the summit gathered amassed fortunes without limits as laborers toiled endlessly. And the elite at the pinnacle required residences that proclaimed their triumphs, that distinguished them from the masses. They sought grand estates, and Fifth Avenue in New York City emerged as the prime spot for constructing such opulent homes. Chapter 3. Mrs. Astor shapes an elite realm. Wealth by itself wasn't enough to secure a place in Gilded Age upper society. The Vanderbilts discovered this through bitter experience. When William Henry Vanderbilt, the Commodore's son, attempted to infiltrate New York's exclusive circles during the 1870s, he encountered shut doors. His clan possessed $100 million. They controlled railroads. They exerted vast economic influence. Yet none of that counted for much. Established New York lineages viewed the Vanderbilts as nouveau riche, freshly minted wealth, lacking refinement. The Commodore had begun as a ferry operator. That aura of labor, commerce, and manual toil clung stubbornly. The Vanderbilts required a figure to validate their status, a person who regulated entry to the highest strata, whose endorsement signified belonging. That individual was Carolyn Schermerhorn Astor. Known universally as Mrs. Astor, she hailed from long-standing New York affluence. The Schermerhorns had thrived since the colonial era. Through land, commerce, and finance, the dignified sorts of estates built gradually across generations. In 1853, when Caroline wed William Backhouse Astor Jr., she allied with yet another venerable dynasty. The Astors had built their riches via fur trade and Manhattan property, ancient enough for prestige, substantial enough for clout. By the 1870s, Caroline resolved that somebody had to delineate New York's aristocracy. Far too many fresh millionaires were surfacing, funds from rails, petroleum, ironworks. Such surging prosperity risked diluting the heritage of ancient houses. Absent sentinels, any tycoon with cash might assert rank. She declared herself the sentinel, and she enlisted allies. Ward McAllister, a Southerner who had profited in California before settling in New York with grand designs, joined her. He possessed cultured sensibilities, familiarity with European journeys, and leisure to orchestrate lavish gatherings. He served as Caroline's aide, consultant, and upholder. In tandem, they forged frameworks, protocols, a hierarchy that divided the worthy from the unworthy. The notion of the 400 arrived first. McAllister is credited with inventing the phrase in 1888, although Caroline had long adhered to its essence. The principle was straightforward. New York's core elite comprised precisely 400 individuals, not one extra. That figure allegedly mirrored the space in her ballroom at 5 Fifth Avenue, though, in truth, it was capricious. The key was scarcity. By capping membership at a set count, Caroline and McAllister rendered belonging priceless. If just 400 souls qualified, then counting among them signified ultimate prestige. What path led to admission? Caroline decreed the terms. No formal petitions existed, no measurable standards. She alone judged fitness. Her nod opened doors. Her rejection sealed banishment forever. Hereditary affluent clans gained automatic entry. The Livingstons, the Stuyvesants, the Rhinelanders, lineages prosperous prior to the Revolution. This formed her foundation of roughly 50 to 75 households deemed authentic, the leftover positions filled with upstart fortunes that demonstrated suitability. Earning approval demanded sustained displays of decorum. It involved forging apt alliances, suitable unions, refined discernment, and above all, securing Caroline's favor. The Vanderbilts, for all their assets, labored for years. The Commodore struck her as coarse, too immersed in dealings, too eager to clash openly with rivals. She deemed him crass. His heir, William, showed greater polish yet remained tied to commerce. Only when William's spouse, Alva, compelled acknowledgement did the Vanderbilts break through. In 1883, Alva staged a masked gala of such extravagance, such lavish outlay, such dazzling splendor, that Caroline had no choice but to notice. The event ran over $200,000, akin to more than $6 million in contemporary terms. 200 attendees, ornate outfits, the residence adorned from attic to foundation, it declared their ascent. The Vanderbilts had established themselves. Like it or not, she appeared. After embracing the Vanderbilts, acceptance rippled outward. The lineage at last stood validated. This regime demanded ongoing vigilance. Caroline conducted steady soirees amid the season, spanning November to early spring. She arranged suppers. She frequented the opera from her reserved loge. She escaped summers to Newport, Rhode Island, presiding at her villa, Beechwood. The social calendar followed rigid timelines. Mondays belonged to the opera. All of consequence gathered at the Metropolitan Opera, less for the sounds than for visibility. Lodges ranked by prestige. Caroline's held pride of place in the first level. The optimal vantage. There, she could overlook the auditorium, observing presences and companions. Visiting cards proved indispensable. Women deposited them upon calls. Not both. Returning home involved depositing your calling card on a silver salver proffered by the butler. Those cards carried specific signals. A folded corner indicated a personal visit instead of one delivered by a servant. Certain days were set aside for hosting visitors. Tuesdays could be Caroline's designated receiving day, so arriving then ensured she'd welcome you, while Wednesdays signaled she wouldn't. Young ladies entered society through meticulously planned debutante balls. These presentations unveiled daughters to elite circles, signaling their readiness for courtship and matrimony. Caroline's gathering stood out as the pinnacle of such affairs. An invitation signified your family's ascent to prominence. Exclusion implied invisibility. Gentlemen operated under somewhat altered customs. Financial achievements weren't sufficient on their own. Essential were affiliations with prestigious clubs like the Union Club, the Metropolitan Club, and the Knickerbocker Club. These venues offered arenas for affluent males to convene, negotiate transactions, and solidify alliances. Gaining entry demanded endorsements from current members. A single negative vote could bar you forever. The framework was engineered to stifle upward movement. Caroline and her set aimed to safeguard their elite status. Through intricate protocols and ceremonies that hinged on her endorsement, she guaranteed that freshly acquired fortunes couldn't just purchase inclusion. Permission had to be bestowed, yet the arrangement had flaws. It depended on newcomers valuing that validation. The initial wave of industrial titans frequently disregarded it. Commodore Vanderbilt, for instance, apparently dismissed Caroline's opinions entirely. His riches and influence sufficed. Their offspring showed greater concern. William Vanderbilt, and particularly his spouse Alva, pursued social validation. Their progeny wed into long-standing clans. Status influenced commercial networks, matrimonial opportunities, and public reputation. The subsequent generation obsessed over it most. Into the 1890s and early 1900s, the younger Vanderbilts, Astors, and fellow heirs matured believing their place at the summit was innate. They'd experienced no alternative reality. The hierarchy appeared innate and enduring. Caroline upheld her dominance until passing away in 1907. At that point, she was aged and often disoriented, yet revered as the ultimate judge of refinement. Following her demise, various figures attempted to inherit her mantle. None fully prevailed. Society splintered. Several ladies asserted influence. Protocols softened. Still, in her zenith from about 1875 to 1900, she exercised an authority unattainable through wealth alone. She determined significance, and the opulent clans erecting palaces along Fifth Avenue craved her sanction. Those residences served as bold assertions of affluence and sophistication, bids to affirm legitimacy, with Fifth Avenue emerging as the backdrop for such displays. Chapter 4. Fifth Avenue transforms into the Gold Coast. Back in 1870, the section of Fifth Avenue north of 50th Street lay largely undeveloped. Scattered brownstones dotted the landscape, interspersed with empty parcels, foliage, and a serene, nearly rural ambiance. The elite living quarters remained concentrated farther south, near Washington Square and the lower stretches of Fifth Avenue. 2 decades on, the scene had utterly shifted. The corridor between 50th and 90th Streets had evolved into America's priciest housing market. Row upon row featured grand limestone estates, evoking French chateaux, Italian palazzos, Beaux-Arts spectacles, each more imposing and ornate than its neighbors. This became Vanderbilt Row, Carnegie Hill, Millionaires Row, the tangible embodiment of Gilded Age opulence, erected with astonishing swiftness. The shift ignited with the Vanderbilts. William Henry Vanderbilt, the Commodore's son, launched the boom in 1879. He erected a sprawling brownstone at Fifth Avenue and 51st Street. Uncontent with a single dwelling, he constructed 3 adjoining homes, one for him and his wife, plus one apiece for his 2 daughters. The project tallied nearly $2 million. Yet brownstone soon seemed passé. The vogue turned to white limestone, refined, continental, and the preferred aesthetic was French, particularly the Loire Valley chateaux. Ignore the fact that European aristocrats had spent generations crafting them. U.S. tycoons demanded equivalence immediately. Constructed in mere 2 years, Richard Morris Hunt emerged as the go-to designer. A Paris-trained alumnus of the École des Beaux-Arts, the inaugural American there, he grasped French design profoundly. Crucially, he comprehended his patron's desires, splendor, impact, structures that proclaimed fortune from afar. Hunt obliged. In 1883, he crafted a residence for William Kissam Vanderbilt and Alva, his wife. It ascended at Fifth Avenue and 52nd Street, directly opposite William Henry Vanderbilt's brownstones. Rendered in French Gothic style with gray limestone, it boasted pitched roofs and intricate carvings throughout. Interiors boasted medieval wall hangings, leaded windows, and oak paneling sourced from old-world properties. The edifice ran $3 million, with another $2 million devoted to interiors and adornments. The Vanderbilt Chateau. You established the trend, and suddenly every tycoon craved a French chateau, an Italian Renaissance estate, or a Beaux-Arts residence, anything European that evoked generations of noble heritage, regardless of how recently the wealth had been amassed. The race in architecture intensified rapidly. When the Vanderbilts erected their home on 52nd Street, the heirs responded with something grander on 65th. If Carnegie hired designers for a property on 91st, another family pushed even higher uptown. Every estate aimed to surpass the ones nearby. Andrew Carnegie constructed his residence between 90th and 91st Streets in 1899. He had examined the surrounding properties closely and concluded they were overly showy. His design would prioritize restraint, sophistication, and grace. Even so, it exceeded $1 million in expense and spanned a full city block. Restraint remained a matter of perspective. Henry Clay Frick, Carnegie's former associate turned competitor, opted for a site farther south on 70th Street. His home was intended from the outset to evolve into a public gallery. Frick had begun amassing works by renowned European artists. He sought a structure that could showcase them effectively, featuring neoclassical elements, expansive exhibition spaces, and optimal illumination. The residence debuted in 1914, right as this opulent period drew to a close. The Ayres family developed several properties. Caroline Ayres' home at 845 Fifth Avenue appeared restrained alongside the extravagances that followed. Her son expanded the scale, and her nephews pushed it further. The clan controlled stretches of land along Fifth Avenue. Profits from Manhattan property investments funded additional acquisitions there, whose rising worth fueled even more purchases. Senator William Andrews Clark, who had amassed riches through copper extraction in Montana, created what might have been the most lavish abode of them all. 121 chambers, 4 dedicated galleries, several dance halls. It demanded $7 million in 7 years of labor, wrapping up in 1911. Detractors deemed it garish. Clark paid no mind. He possessed vast resources and intended for all to recognize it. This surge in building opened doors for designers, builders, interior specialists, and skilled laborers. Shipments of marble arrived from European suppliers in massive quantities. Craftsmen from Italy arrived to sculpt intricate stonework. Specialists from France fitted ornate woodwork and furnishings. These grand homes served as displays for high-end imports. Erecting such a structure rarely happened swiftly. Typically 2 to 4 years sufficed. In the meantime, adjacent residents tolerated relentless commotion, the grind of stone saws, the clang of hammers, carts unloading supplies. The upheaval proved overwhelming, yet few voiced strong objections. Along Fifth Avenue, households were either in the midst of construction or plotting their own. The properties vied in their finer points. Which hosted the grandest dance floor, which boasted the most striking marble stairway, which held the priciest array of artworks. The affluent proprietors managed their dwellings like galleries, hosting guided viewings for select guests, flaunting recent treasures, and the personnel needs were immense. A residence spanning 30 to 50 rooms required at least 20 to 40 household workers, a head butler, chief housekeeper, head chef, several valets, numerous chambermaids, kitchen helpers, drivers for the motor cars, stable hands for the steeds, caretakers for any landscaped areas. The help occupied the upper levels, in cramped spaces with basic setups, wholly isolated from the splendor underneath. They ascended via dedicated stairs. Visibility was forbidden except during duties. Overseeing this setup demanded ongoing oversight. The chief housekeeper directed the women. The butler managed the men. All reported ultimately to the mistress of the household, who directed everything. Expenses stretched well past building and wages. Municipal levies rose as officials valued these estates accurately. Coverage policies carried steep premiums. Winter fuel bills soared. Such homes featured scores of hearths, alongside nascent heating apparatuses that devoured coal in huge amounts. Upkeep never ceased. Tiles slipped on roofs. Stonework developed fissures. Room aesthetics needed refreshes periodically to remain current. Still, for about 2 decades, from roughly 1885 to 1905, the expansion persisted. Additional estates, vaster ones, more ornate creations. Fifth Avenue transformed into a ravine of riches. Strolling northward involved encountering residence after residence, each proclaiming its inhabitants' prosperity. Such a dense clustering of fortunes in one compact zone had no precedent. Across just 20 blocks dwelled clans whose combined assets reached hundreds of millions. They mingled at shared social events. Their offspring wed one another. They held seats on identical company panels. From the parlors of Fifth Avenue, they influenced the nation's commerce and banking. The thoroughfare turned into a sightseeing draw. Folks traversed it on foot or via streetcars simply to marvel at the estates. On weekend afternoons, the walkways teemed with ordinary families, eyeing abodes forever beyond their grasp. The elite inhabitants dismissed the crowds or chafed at the gawking, but lacked the power to halt it. After all, these were personal domains along communal boulevards, and the spectacle relied on an order that appeared enduring. The privileged class would endure in affluence. Their heirs would receive and sustain these legacy homes. The estates, with these grand residences, were meant to endure for centuries, much like the opulent estates of Europe. The architects and owners who constructed them back in the 1890s never dreamed that the majority would vanish within 3 decades. No one anticipated the downfall of their world, yet pressures were mounting that would ultimately dismantle all they had built. Those pressures emerged from corners far removed from the daily lives of Fifth Avenue dwellers, in workshops, crowded slums, printed pages, and rising reform campaigns. The reaction to the extravagance of the Gilded Age loomed on the horizon. It simply hadn't swept in quite yet. Chapter 5. Within a Gilded Age Gala. The summons came well ahead of the occasion, printed on thick paper with intricate etching, your name inscribed in flowing calligraphy, along with the precise hour, venue, and the unspoken assumption of your presence. Declining an invitation to a prominent soiree without a compelling excuse was simply inconceivable. Such gatherings transcended mere celebrations. They shaped or shattered social standing, facilitated unions, forged commercial partnerships, and vividly showcased the established order of society. Getting ready for the evening demanded extensive effort over several days. For the ladies in particular, no aspect could be overlooked. The attire needed to be fresh, or at minimum, unseen at any prior affair among this crowd. It had to strike a balance, stylish yet restrained, lavish without excess. A single outfit could run into the thousands of dollars, matching the annual earnings of someone toiling in a mill. Accessories followed suit. Precious stones were indispensable, from diamonds to emeralds, rubies, and sapphires. The elite matrons draped themselves in heirlooms worth immense sums. Crowns, chains, cuffs, and bands adorned them. These treasures fulfilled 2 roles, overt symbols of affluence and also a form of liquid asset. In times of monetary setback, such items could be discreetly converted to cash. Numerous households navigated short-term crises by parting with select pieces. Coiffeurs demanded prolonged care. Personal attendants labored with heated tongs fired by gas, crafting complex arrangements secured with ornate pins, sometimes incorporating extensions for added fullness. The aim was elevation and grandeur, styles stacked upward to lend an air of stature and majesty. Gentlemen faced simpler demands. Formal wear followed a strict code: dark frock coat, crisp vest, silk tie, gloves, and polished footwear. This sameness was deliberate. Males avoided rivalry in attire. Their status shone through the elegance of their female companions. Conveyances started pulling up between 9 and 10 at night. Showing up too soon might signal undue enthusiasm. Lingering too late could mean bypassing key interactions. Arrival demanded precise timing. Drawing near a prominent estate during ball night proved mesmerizing. Canopies extended from street to doorway. Crimson runners lined the path. Uniformed attendants waited poised, and officers held crowds of spectators at bay, all eager to glimpse the elite's entrance. Once indoors, the metamorphosis was total. Staff had toiled for days in advance. All lower-level chambers were thrown open. Pieces of furniture vanished or shifted aside. Blooms overflowed every corner: roses, orchids, lilies, ferns, and massive vases. The floral display might total 10,000 only to fade by dawn. Illumination played a pivotal role. Fixtures, whether gas or nascent bulbs, glowed intensely, supplemented by tapers and branched holders for a softer glow. The intent was dazzling clarity. Though held after dark, these affairs mimicked broad daylight, vivid enough to reveal every face, to make gems gleam, and to banish any dim spots that might shield from judgment. The hosts welcomed arrivals in the grand salon or parlor. Visitors filed through a formal queue, firm grips, quick exchanges, identities proclaimed by the steward. This ritual affirmed attendance, inclusion, and belonging. Standing there signified approval. Tunes filled the air from the outset. An ensemble, often tucked into a balcony or alcove for sound without sight, performed waltzes, mazurkas, polkas. As the night wore on, bolder imports from abroad took hold, the turkey trot, the bunny hug, drawing frowns from elders but enthusiasm from the youth. The dancing commenced with decorum. Seasoned spouses led off, followed by newer pairs, and at last, eligible debutantes paired with suitable escorts. Protocol dictated this progression. Straying from it hinted at defiance of norms. Unwed ladies attended these events to catch the eye of prospective mates. Their chaperones observed keenly, tracking which gentlemen sought their company on the floor. Lingering with a single partner too often implied undue interest. Scant partners overall pointed to neglect. Balance was key. Consistent notice from a range of fitting admirers. For males, galas offered a chance to size up potential brides. The dance floor allowed for dialogue, revealing wit, character, and pursuits. One could gauge poise, social grace, and, naturally, the assets and networks of her kin. In the intervals, attendees mingled freely. They wandered through chambers, appreciating artworks and decor, sharing whispers and offering insights. Every interaction felt deliberate. The choice of conversation partners carried weight. Engaging in serious talks with prominent figures implied that you held significance yourself. Near midnight, the evening meal appeared, not as a traditional sit-down affair. Instead, it was a lavish spread in the dining hall and nearby areas, with tables overflowing with delicacies. Steaming entrees, chilled platters, intricate displays meant to dazzle, including entire pheasants, salmon fillets, lobster tails, fresh oysters, luxurious caviar, and an endless stream of champagne. Just the cuisine could run $20,000. Attendees dined on their feet or in casual clusters. This relaxed setup was by design. It promoted mingling. Folks could drift from one circle to another, spark chats, forge links. This was prime time for real dealings to unfold. Parents might schedule introductions for their offspring. Partnerships took shape. The meal stretched on for at least an hour. Afterward, the dancing picked up again. The energy quickened. Constraints eased a bit. As hours passed and the bubbly worked its magic, the vibe softened. Nothing outrageous, never that, but sufficiently to let giggles roll out more freely. Talks gained momentum. The gathering wrapped up without a fixed hour. People left at their leisure. The hosts lingered until the final visitors departed, sometimes as late as 3 or 4 a.m. The help stuck around even longer, tidying up, hauling away plates, dismantling blooms, rearranging furnishings. They could toil right through to sunrise. The following morning, papers detailed the grandest soirees. Social columns named guests, detailed attire, highlighted dance pairings. Such reports drew avid readers. A nod in print signaled relevance. Omission spelled irrelevance. Hosting one of these extravaganzas demanded eye-watering sums. A big event could hit 50,000 to 100,000. Think blooms, feasts, personnel, orchestras, embellishments. In modern terms, that's like 2 to 4 million for a single night. A fleeting burst of diversion soon lost to memory, yet these occasions transcended mere amusement. They showcased dominance, flaunted fortunes, solidified class standings. Each detail, from the summonses to the pedals, the spread, the tunes, underscored the host's deep pockets and the invitees' worthiness. And the rhythm was astounding. In peak season, a flagship ball occurred almost weekly. Countless lesser gatherings filled the gaps: suppers, gatherings, stage outings, opera evenings. The elite devoted months annually to little more than socializing among themselves. Sustaining this existence demanded vast assets: hours, cash, aids, vigor, and a refusal to ponder its value. The setup endured while all bought into its purpose. But when doubts arose about whether opulent galas held true merit, cracks appeared in the foundation. By the early 1900s, skeptics were emerging. Reformers highlighted the inequities. A single ball's price tag outstripped a mill hand's lifelong earnings. Those same dynasties hosting 100,000 bashes paid laborers starvation rates. The backlash bit deep. Certain affluent organizers grew prickly. Some opted for subtlety. A handful even reevaluated their ways. Still, the tradition pressed on, for halting it would concede the detractors' point, and the Gilded Age upper crust wasn't prepared for that reckoning. Not quite yet. Chapter 6. The workforce hidden downstairs. A Gilded Age estate couldn't operate on its own. For each polished gala, each stiff repast, each impeccably tended home, an unseen legion toiled without pause. The scale was immense. A standard Fifth Avenue manor needed 30 to 50 personnel. Grander setups boasted 70 or beyond. The Vanderbilt cottage in Newport, a 70-room retreat, maintained a steady force of 40, and that excluded seasonal extras for peak occasions. The order among the staff mirrored the strictness upstairs. The butler reigned supreme over the men. He directed the wine stock, directed ceremonial duties, and served as the Lord's close aide. A capable one pulled in $200 to $2,000 a year, solid wages for the time, underscoring the role's stature. The housekeeper held parallel authority, but over the women. She controlled bedding, directed sanitation, tracked domestic finances, and guaranteed seamless function. Her pay aligned with his. As a duo, they anchored the oversight that drove the home's rhythm. Under them lay expert roles. The chef commanded the galley with drill sergeant precision. She often led 2 or 3 helpers alongside kitchen girls. In affluent homes, she was typically French, recruited for the cachet of Gallic fare. These experts drew top compensation and earned fame for their fiery dispositions. Valets for ladies attended the lady of the house and grown girls. They styled locks, cared for closets, prepared for journeys, and offered intimate assistance. This demanded expertise and practice. A proper valet had to grasp trends, handle materials, craft complex coiffes, and household staff upheld strict privacy regarding personal family affairs. Valets handled comparable responsibilities for the gentleman of the house and his grown sons, managing their attire, selecting outfits, preparing baths, and even shaving them when needed. This role demanded expertise in male apparel trends and unwavering trustworthiness. Footmen, typically youthful males clad in distinctive uniforms, waited on meals, greeted visitors at the entrance, and offered various forms of support. Selection often prioritized physical appeal, stature was essential, and attractive features were advantageous. Their ornate attire aimed to captivate callers, positioning them as elements of the household's grandeur. Their roles were highly noticeable, integrating them into the overall presentation. Maids were segmented into distinct groups. Those assigned to parlors tidied communal areas, ensuring the elegant zones visible to company remained pristine. Chambermaids tended to sleeping quarters. Scullery aides toiled beneath the chef's direction. Washwomen, frequently a team of several, confronted vast loads of laundry and related chores in the lower levels. Every division carried its specific obligations and social standing. At the very bottom ranked the scullery hands. They scoured cookware, mopped surfaces, and handled the grimiest jobs that others avoided. Often teenage girls fresh from abroad, they received around $3 per week. They bunked in cramped garret spaces, endured shifts lasting 16 hours, and hoped for promotion to superior roles. The toil never eased. A chambermaid's routine started near 6 a.m., igniting fires and hearths across the residence, disposing of overnight waste, delivering warm water for ablutions, setting up the morning meal, presenting it, removing the remnants, dusting common areas prior to the household stirring and descending. Throughout, they strove to stay unseen. Servants learned to blend seamlessly into the surroundings. Encountering a family member signaled a lapse. Following initial chores, midday meal setup and delivery ensued, alongside later afternoon errands, culminating in evening feast arrangements. Lavish suppers demanded intricate protocols, successive dishes, precise sequencing, and synchronized delivery. The head butler directed proceedings akin to an orchestra leader. A single error, a dribble of sauce, a fumbled item might lead to immediate termination. Post-supper cleanup involved manual dishwashing, pot scouring, stowing utensils, refreshing the eating area, and readying for tomorrow. Culinary team members could continue until 11 p.m. or beyond, only to rise once more at dawn. A single free day per month was typical. Certain bosses granted even fewer. That respite generally fell on Sunday afternoons and evenings, barely sufficient for worship services, corresponding with kin, and brief recuperation before resuming obligations. Accommodations differed widely. Superior bosses supplied comfortable quarters, sufficient nourishment, and courteous treatment. Inferior ones packed workers into chilly roof spaces, doled out leftovers, and drove them without mercy. Staff lacked remedies. Positions were terminable at whim, with sudden ousters absent cause or endorsements. Without work came no earnings. No earnings risked destitution. The occupation posed hazards too. Cooking areas sweltered. Flames raged non-stop. Weighty vessels inflicted scalds. Blades sliced. Wash areas employed caustic substances. Tumbles from stools during high window polishing frequently maimed or fatal. No injury benefits prevailed. Harm meant ejection and substitution. Pay appeared meager today, yet fit the era. Lodging and meals came gratis. Servants avoided rent, grocery costs, or uniform expenses. Earnings equaled funds for savings or remittances. Numerous newcomers aided overseas kin via their pay. Nonetheless, the inequities glared. A personal attendant pulling $400 a year outfitted a lady whose one evening dress exceeded that sum. Liveried attendants on $300 annually attended banquets where vintages alone surpassed their monthly take. Such contrasts confronted them constantly, undeniable. Certain bosses valued their help. They offered holiday presents, longevity rewards, and health aid during sicknesses. Such kindnesses fostered devotion. Appreciated employees lingered for years, evolving into quasi-family members. Harsh bosses, conversely, withheld pay for trivial faults. They banned suitors, barring romantic pursuits among the help. They ousted expectant chambermaids sans endorsements, dooming them from future decent employ. The authority gap was absolute. Female youth encountered acute risks. Unsolicited overtures from household males or visitors occurred routinely. Rejection risked job loss. Compliance chanced conception and disgrace. Some bosses faulted the women anyway, insisting on their provocativeness. Targets received no safeguards, supporters, or redress. Union efforts for home aids proved unfeasible. They resided amid bosses. They operated solo, sans collectives. Replacements abounded. Labor groups targeted mill hands and colliers, those uniting in masses. Home aids stayed detached and exposed. Into the early 1900s, availability of such aid waned. Young females' factory jobs brought in smaller paychecks, yet they granted far greater independence. Employees could clock out after their shift, reside on their own, and enjoy personal space. Despite the reduced earnings, a significant number chose manufacturing over household servitude. Affluent households observed this shift. Securing reliable servants turned problematic. Continually onboarding fresh hires proved draining. Salaries needed to rise to lure workers. The financial burden of sustaining large retinues intensified. The First World War hastened the transformation. Soldiers departed for the front lines. Women stepped into industrial roles to aid the conflict. Housework began to appear outdated, servile, a vestige of noble Europe, incompatible with contemporary United States. The labor scarcity complicated mansion upkeep. Operating a 50-room residence with only partial staffing proved unfeasible. Shortcuts emerged, quality slipped, and expenses climbed even as performance dropped. Such strains weighed on the entire framework. These grand estates demanded personnel to thrive. Lacking sufficient support, they morphed into liabilities instead of symbols of prestige. The prosperous clans who erected these opulent structures, banking on endless domestic availability, now faced entrapment in properties they could scarcely sustain. Meanwhile, the very laborers who underpinned the opulent Gilded Age existence were departing, pursuing superior prospects, and rejecting outdated conditions. Their subtle defiance contributed to eroding the structure internally. Chapter 7. Continental Admiration and the Pursuit of Artworks. U.S. tycoons faced a dilemma. Their fortunes surpassed those of old-world nobles. Their residences dwarfed continental chateaus. Yet few confused them with true aristocracy. They appeared fresh, unpolished, tied to commerce. Wealth stemmed from ironworks and petroleum processing. By contrast, European elites passed down lands and honors spanning generations. Americans craved validation, artistic validation. They aspired to appear as cultured benefactors beyond mere crass entrepreneurs. Thus, they embraced the ultimate equalizer. Purchasing iconic pieces, particularly works by venerable artists, offerings from the Renaissance, Gothic weaves, classical carvings, treasures burdened with historic lineage. Unable to claim noble ancestry, one might acquire it, or at minimum, the accoutrements evoking it. The moment aligned ideally for all involved. European upper classes possessed heirlooms but craved liquidity. Yankee magnates held liquidity but sought artistic pedigree. A bustling cross-Atlantic exchange blossomed during the 1880s and 1890s. United Kingdom peers offloaded first. The farm slump of the 1870s ravaged their leasing revenues. Properties that had nourished lineages for ages now failed to meet bills. Artworks adorning rural manors for 2 centuries headed to sales blocks. Stateside purchasers snapped them up. J.P. Morgan pioneered the frenzy. The financier curated one of the finest personal troves ever. He snapped up complete manor inventories in bulk. Vendors presented him with lists. Morgan marked selections, at times entire sections. Items were gathered and transported to Manhattan or his British home. Morgan amassed it all: canvases, documents, scarce volumes, oriental ceramics, pharaonic relics, Gothic reliquaries, Quattrocento medals. Anything antique, precious, and loaded with heritage drew his interest. His collection overflowed several storage facilities. He rarely viewed much of it. Ownership sufficed. Henry Clay Frick adopted a narrower strategy. He fixated solely on canonical canvases: Rembrandts, Vermeers, Van Dycks, Velázquez. He designed his Fifth Avenue abode expressly to showcase them fittingly. Expansive exhibit spaces, optimal illumination, environmental regulation. The dwelling functioned essentially as a secluded gallery where Frick resided. Frick shelled out staggering sums. In 1911, he secured a Rembrandt likeness for $500,000, over $15 million in modern terms, for a single painting. He viewed it as a steal. Masterpieces invariably appreciated, and possessing a Rembrandt signified status. It proclaimed discernment, elegance, artistic command. The Vanderbilts gathered items as well, albeit with less method than Morgan or Frick. They snapped up Gallic furnishings, Gobelin hangings, Tuscan Quattrocento figures. Anything vendors persuaded them was essential. Their estates evolved into showcases of imported continental crafts, transplanted en masse into U.S. settings. William Randolph Hearst escalated the mania. He procured whole continental interiors, wainscoting stripped from Loire castles, vaults from Venetian villas. Crews dismantled them, ferried across the ocean, and reassembled in his holdings. A hearth from an Iberian abbey? He'd claim the abbey, extract the prize, abandon the surplus. The intermediaries brokering these deals prospered handsomely. Joseph Duveen reigned over the commerce. This English merchant, armed with elite ties, grasped the dynamics flawlessly. He pinpointed cash-strapped lineages. He identified prestige-hungry U.S. barons. They orchestrated these transactions, earning hefty fees in the process. Duveen excelled as a persuasive dealer, too. He persuaded U.S. collectors that some painters held greater value than the rest. He championed Rembrandt in particular, along with Dutch Old Masters and Italian Renaissance masterpieces overall. He minimized the appeal of creators whose works proved tougher to market. His sway influenced the makeup of American collections. The volume of art shipped across the ocean was staggering. From 1870 to 1914, countless important artworks departed Europe for the States. While the Louvre and National Gallery remained untouched, private collections were stripped bare. Pieces that had adorned British country estates for generations found new homes in opulent Fifth Avenue residences. Europeans felt ambivalent about it all. The deals injected vital funds, yet they symbolized a deep cultural hemorrhage. Priceless national icons slipping away overseas. Ancestral legacies peddled to U.S. tycoons. Certain voices lambasted the nobility for trading heirlooms for quick profits, though the elites desperately needed the cash. Retaining the artworks would have meant forfeiting the properties altogether. U.S. museum curators reaped rewards as well. J.P. Morgan bequeathed the bulk of his acquisitions to the Metropolitan Museum. Following Frick's passing, his full residence and its furnishings transformed into a public institution. Additional affluent donors followed suit with comparable bequests. American venues secured European gems without haggling with overseas authorities. Yet, acquiring art didn't instantly grant refinement. Detractors, particularly those from Europe, ridiculed the newcomers. They argued that merely acquiring heritage differed from cultivating it. The Yanks were hoarding relics, not grasping their essence. They acted as purchasers, not true experts. Some barbs rang true. Many U.S. magnates snapped up items without deep comprehension. They leaned on agents' counsel. Purchases often stemmed from prestige rather than true delight. A handful possessed real expertise, but plenty just aimed for dazzling displays. Isabella Stewart Gardner stood apart. This Bostonian constructed a faux Venetian palazzo in her city to showcase her acquisitions. In contrast to most rich collectors, she possessed profound insight into art and sculpture. She immersed herself in study. She journeyed far and wide. She forged bonds with creators and experts. Her collection embodied authentic enthusiasm beyond mere fortune. Rivalry among acquirers inflated costs. When several tycoons vied for the identical Rembrandt, auctions soared to ridiculous heights. Agents fueled the frenzy. They whispered about rival interest. They fabricated shortages. The Americans, eager to prevail, shelled out any sum demanded. By the dawn of the 1900s, prime European treasures were landing predominantly in American possession. This marked a profound shift in cultural dynamics. For ages, iconic canvases had lingered in Europe. Suddenly, they migrated westward in vast numbers. Global museums took note. U.S. establishments emerged as key hubs. Such habits also imposed duties. Possessing major works entailed an expectation to eventually lend them to the public via museum gifts or by welcoming academics into one's space. Gilded Age benefactors mostly embraced this role. They viewed themselves as custodians, beyond simple proprietors. The masterpieces would endure beyond their lifetimes. Their enduring mark would lie in broadening access. But World War I upended it all. Abruptly, sourcing art from Europe carried new weight. U.S. troops were battling on that soil. What once appeared as elegant exchange now seemed fraught. Was it right for Americans to claim heirlooms from nations they were aiding in combat? Post-war, the trade persisted, though circumstances evolved. The tycoons who had amassed those grand troves were growing elderly or passing away. Their descendants frequently lacked enthusiasm for upholding vast ensembles. The collections started to break apart. Museums snapped up portions. Others looped back to Europe. The grand private assemblages of the Gilded Age gradually scattered, and this entire pursuit exposed a core truth about that era's fortunes. These figures could acquire virtually anything, save for the singular prize they craved most: validation, artistic prestige, the esteem born of generational polish. They might possess a Rembrandt, yet they couldn't erase the origins of their wealth in oil fields and ironworks. They stayed rooted as shrewd U.S. entrepreneurs who had amassed immense riches. The acquisitions failed to recast their identities, though the artworks outlived them. Those pieces they secured continue to grace American galleries. The ensembles they formed still enrich society at large. Their fortunes have vanished. Their grand homes lie in ruins, but the paintings persist. In this way, they secured a form of perpetuity, not the noble standing they pursued, but maybe something richer, an enduring gift to American heritage. Chapter 8. The Muckrakers' Strike. The elite believed they shaped their own narrative. They commanded media outlets. They funded philanthropic causes. They erected reading halls and art venues bearing their monikers. They counted on widespread appreciation for their benevolence. Soon after, the reporters showed up, and the whole landscape shifted. The label, Quote 2 originated with Theodore Roosevelt, who drew it from John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, a figure so fixated on shoveling filth that he ignored the divine above. Roosevelt intended it as a sharp rebuke. Yet these reporters zeroed in on the grime of society, not its advancements. They uncovered graft rather than praising successes. The muckrakers, though, embraced the term as praise. Absolutely, they dug through the dirt because the U.S. was brimming with it, demanding a thorough cleanup. The campaign kicked off in periodicals. McClure's magazine blazed the trail. Established in 1893 by Samuel S. McClure, it blended rigorous exposés with stories and broad appeal pieces. McClure grasped a vital truth. Everyday middle-class folks yearned to grasp the powers molding their lives. They felt unease about the workings of riches and authority. All they required was a straightforward guide. In 1902, McClure's unleashed 3 explosive installments at once: Lincoln Steffens laid bare City Hall scandals in Quote 3. Ray Stannard Baker delved into workplace hardships and racial divides. Ida Tarbell launched her blistering takedown of Standard Oil. Tarbell's effort struck deepest. Over several years, she pored over John D. Rockefeller's operations. She spoke with ex-Standard Oil staffers. She secured private records. She followed the firm's path from inception to its dominance as a trust. Her findings stunned audiences. Rockefeller hadn't risen through better goods or customer care. Instead, he'd employed cutthroat strategies, covert pacts with rail lines for favored freight costs, undercutting prices to ruin rivals, spying on industry foes, payoffs, intimidation. The firm methodically crushed any opposition. Tarbell penned her account with accuracy and calm. No hype was necessary. The evidence condemned itself. She illustrated how Rockefeller's control inflated costs for buyers while devastating local enterprises, how the monopoly hoarded riches amid widespread hardship, how a single tycoon's gains exacted a heavy toll on countless lives. The installments appeared from 1902 to 1904. They formed a volume, The History of the Standard Oil Company, which flew off shelves as a hit. Overnight, Rockefeller transformed from industry titan to plunderer. His riches weren't lauded triumphs but ill-gotten spoils. Rockefeller attempted a rebuttal, highlighting his giving. The libraries, schools, health studies. Didn't his donations merit credit? The masses weren't convinced. As a detractor observed, he was merely returning with one fist what he'd seized with the other. His generosity couldn't wash away the predatory paths to his empire. Tainted funds stayed tainted, no matter the noble use. More muckrakers emulated Tarbell. Upton Sinclair probed the slaughterhouse sector. His 1906 book, The Jungle, revealed appalling scenes in Chicago's meatpacking plants, tainted products reaching dinner tables, laborers maimed by equipment, rodents tumbling into meat processors. Outrage swept the nation. After devouring the novel, President Roosevelt summoned Sinclair to the Oval Office and launched probes. Sinclair meant to spotlight labor abuses, the perils, low pay, absent protections, but the focus landed on the unsafe eats. In his words later, "I targeted the heart, but I struck the gut instead." Even so, the work sparked change. The 1906 Pure Food and Drug Act, along with the Meat Inspection Act, owed their passage straight to the jungle's uproar. David Graham Phillips targeted Senate scandals. His 1906 pieces, Quote of 5, demonstrated how rich magnates swayed lawmakers via bribes and sway. Lawmakers were meant to champion citizens, but they advanced business agendas. Phillips called out culprits, tracked the cash flows, and clarified the rot's inner workings. The critiques hit particular sectors and figures, too. Thomas Lawson, once a Wall Street insider, penned frenzied finance to unmask market-rigging plots. Charles Edward Russell examined the beef cartel. Ray Stannard Baker tackled rail giants' grips. No key sector escaped the glare. Outlets running these revelations watched their audiences explode. McClure's drew in hundreds of thousands. Collier's Weekly, Everybody's Magazine, and The American Magazine all ran similar digs. They learned that unveiling wrongdoing boosted sales. The public craved these revelations. The elite pushed back hard. They urged sponsors to shun the offending journals. They snapped up papers to spin opposing tales. They turned to emerging PR agencies to polish their reputations. John D. Rockefeller Jr. sought to restore his father's image through the industrialists, turned to public relations to salvage their tarnished reputations, bringing on board Ivy Lee, among the earliest experts in American PR. He recommended a more gentle strategy. Portray Rockefeller as relatable and compassionate. Capture images of him handing out dimes to kids. Highlight his deep spiritual beliefs. Spotlight his charitable efforts. Sidestep the direct attacks on his practices. Instead, saturate the media with uplifting narratives until the bad press lost its sting. This tactic had some success. Rockefeller's public perception brightened a bit, yet the core wounds lingered. The investigative reporters had exposed how massive empires rose through worker abuse. Once the public grasped that truth, it couldn't be erased. Those probes also sparked tangible changes in policy. Laws like the Pure Food and Drug Act, the Meat Inspection Act, the Federal Trade Commission Act, and the Clayton Antitrust Act all tackled the issues the exposés had uncovered. Such reporting carried genuine weight. It reshaped legislation and altered how people in the U.S. perceived riches. For the upper crust of the Gilded Age, this was a crushing blow. They had long believed their fortunes granted them unquestioned influence, that their achievements validated their grip on authority. The muckrakers demolished that notion head-on. They demonstrated that vast wealth frequently stemmed from mistreatment, not ingenuity. That dominant market control arose from graft, not superior operations. The mental toll was profound. The elite had internalized their self-serving tales. They truly saw themselves as generous patrons, employment generators, architects of progress. The journalists recast them as ruthless hunters, bandits, tyrants. That new lens proved tough to escape. Attitudes among the populace swung sharply. Back in 1880, the majority of Americans revered those tycoons of industry. By 1910, plenty regarded them with distrust or open animosity. The shift wasn't total. Some continued to champion the robber barons, but the widespread agreement had fractured. Riches alone no longer earned automatic admiration. This instability challenged the established order. In earlier days, when Mrs. Astor hosted lavish galas, the press had gushed with praise. But come the dawn of the 1900s, articles grew sharp and questioning. How could the elite squander vast sums on extravagances amid widespread worker hardship? What had once glittered as opulent now appeared grotesque. The muckrakers further ignited a wave of activism. Young readers devoured those revelations and committed to pushing for improvements. Later figures in the progressive movement, union organizers, and lawmakers often credited their inspiration to this brand of journalism. The pieces served as a crash course in reality. They unpacked the true mechanics of influence. They proved that transformation was within reach. Yet by 1912, the height of muckraking had begun to ebb. Publications grappled with financial woes, sponsors pulled funding, a few outlets shut down entirely, others dialed back their edge. The frenzy of scrutiny had crested. Still, from the vantage of the affluent, the harm endured forever. Those writers had shattered the ethical foundation of Gilded Age wealth. They had laid bare the roots in exploitation, the damage of monopolies to society, the inherent unfairness of the setup. No amount of denial could rewind that awareness. After folks in the U.S. comprehended the inner workings of their world, they couldn't feign ignorance. And that insight fueled calls for genuine overhaul, the sort that would ultimately unravel the Gilded Age completely. The muckrakers didn't topple the era single-handedly, but they supplied the crucial ideas and evidence. They armed advocates with solid proof. They swung sentiment away from unregulated opulence. They rendered ongoing indulgence untenable in the political arena. And the powerful elite held a lasting grudge against them for it. Chapter 9. Uprisings among laborers around the 1913 tax. The working class had shown remarkable restraint. Years of it, putting up with meager pay, hazardous workplaces, and the sight of riches piling up for the bosses as families scrimped for basics. But endurance wears thin. By the 1890s, it had snapped. Nationwide, employees started resisting, not through debate, but via walkouts, shutdowns, clashes that occasionally escalated to bloodshed. The Gilded Age magnates learned the hard way that their prosperity hinged on laborers who'd reached their breaking point. The massive 1877 railroad strike established the blueprint. It ignited in West Virginia after the Baltimore and Ohio line slashed pay. Employees quit en masse. The action rippled through rail networks into Maryland, Pennsylvania, and beyond, engulfing the nation. In mere weeks, multitudes of rail workers had halted operations. Companies imported replacements to cross the lines. Protesters clashed with them. Unrest boiled over in various urban centers. Pittsburgh saw guardsmen shoot into gatherings, claiming 20 lives. Rioters retaliated by torching rail assets. Losses ran into the millions. The upheaval dragged on for 45 days until army forces quelled it. The 1880s unleashed fresh turmoil. In 1886, the Haymarket incident in Chicago rattled the country. Laborers were demanding a standard 8-hour shift. At a calm assembly, an explosive device sailed toward law enforcement. 7 cops perished. Officers unleashed volleys into the throng. 4 strikers lost their lives, 8 radicals faced charges, 4 ended up executed despite shaky links to the blast. The Haymarket event struck fear into the hearts of the privileged. If employees resorted to explosives, no place felt secure. The opulent residences along Fifth Avenue, the lavish summer homes in Newport, and the luxurious private rail cars all became potential vulnerabilities. Precautions ramped up. Additional security personnel were brought on board. A wave of suspicion swept through elite circles. Labor actions persisted unabated. Employees in steel mills, coal mines, and textile factories joined the fray. Nearly every key sector grappled with widespread worker discontent. The sequence repeated itself reliably. Laborers called for improved pay or safer environments. Executives dug in their heels. Walkouts ensued. Bosses imported substitute staff. Clashes frequently erupted. The 1892 Homestead incident stood out for its ferocity. Andrew Carnegie's ironworks facility in Pennsylvania. Employees protested salary reductions. Henry Clay Frick, overseeing operations, brought in 300 Pinkerton agents for protection. The agents approached via riverboat. Armed laborers confronted them at the landing. An intense 12-hour exchange of gunfire broke out. 10 lives were lost. Scores more sustained injuries. State forces ultimately quelled the unrest. The employees were defeated. Their labor organization crumbled. Yet Carnegie's standing took an irreversible hit. He had been vacationing in Scotland at the time, insisting he knew nothing of Frick's strategies. Few accepted that excuse. The tycoon who touted prosperity through riches had essentially authorized gunfire against protesting staff. The 1894 Pullman upheaval highlighted the rising coordination among workers. After the Pullman Palace Car Company slashed paychecks while keeping housing costs steady, employees walked off the job. The American Railway Union, under Eugene V. Debs, backed them by halting movement of Pullman vehicles. The action gridlocked transportation across the country. President Cleveland stepped in. He deployed National Guardsmen to dismantle the protest, citing interruptions to postal services. Troops cleared paths for the locomotives. Debs faced charges. The effort unraveled. Still, it proved that laborers could unite beyond single sectors. That prospect alarmed the affluent far more than standalone disputes ever did. Corporate leaders responded identically to each confrontation, shun discussions, recruit stand-ins, resort to force when required. To the elite, yielding signaled frailty. Conceding to one set of employees would invite claims from others, far preferable to dismantle them entirely. Yet these disputes exposed a key vulnerability. The era of gilded excess relied on inexpensive manpower. Grand estates demanded hordes of low-wage household aides. Industrial plants required personnel content with destitution-level compensation. Rail lines depended on operators and crew, enduring grueling shifts for meager rewards. When those individuals withheld their efforts, operations ground to a halt. This handed workers unforeseen leverage. Insufficient to triumph in most battles, executives typically held the upper hand, but potent enough to unsettle the rich, to illustrate that their dominance held limits, that their riches hinged on ongoing submission from those they had long mistreated. Sentiment among the public began to evolve as well. Everyday citizens who previously might have backed employers started to empathize with the protesters. Investigative journalism had laid bare the abuses. Folks grasped the roots of labor's fury. When armed state units fired on demonstrators, it appeared as if privileged figures wielded official authority to safeguard earnings. Such scenes fueled demands for policy shifts. If brutal confrontations loomed as the only option, perhaps targeted compromises offered a wiser path. Reform-minded leaders started advocating for worker protections, caps on shift lengths, workplace safeguards, and union-forming rights. Incremental steps, not revolutionary, but a clear tilt toward labor interests. The upper class opposed every measure. They contended that enterprises would falter under oversight, that open competition demanded total liberty, that employees could simply leave if terms displeased them. State meddling would ruin national wealth, but their case was weakening. Increasing numbers had witnessed the perils of laissez-faire. Unfettered enterprise bred grotesque disparities. Laborers couldn't truly walk away when departure spelled famine. Commerce failed the average person. Transformation was inevitable. The most profound shift arrived in 1913. lawmakers approved the 16th Amendment, establishing a national levy on earnings. At last, authorities gained the ability to directly siphon from fortunes. The elite had battled this idea for generations. Earlier efforts to impose such levies had been invalidated by courts as unlawful. But the reform wave ultimately prevailed. The change gained approval in February 1913. Come October, the inaugural tax statute took hold. Starting brackets remained tame, 1% above $3,000 scaling to 7% beyond $500,000. The prosperous barely noticed the bite, yet the concept unnerved them. Should officials tax salaries, they could target assets next. The authority to levy spelled potential ruin, with brackets destined to escalate. Indeed, within years, amid World War I's enormous fiscal demands, peak levies soared. By 1918, the top tier faced 77%. The epic of amassing boundless, untouchable riches had ended. This fiscal shift reshaped priorities, erecting a palatial home lost appeal when profits faced heavier erosion. Maintaining a staff of 50 domestics grew impractical once labor expenses weighed against slimmer take-home sums. Hosting 100,000 extravaganzas felt it was inefficient for taxes to devour the bulk of one's earnings. The affluent adjusted accordingly. They brought on experts to uncover loopholes. They set up foundations to protect their capital. They shifted holdings abroad. Dodging taxes turned into a thriving sector, yet complete evasion proved impossible. Authorities still extracted their portion. That reality endured. Estate duties came next. Officials imposed levies on legacies as riches transferred to descendants. This curbed the buildup of opulence through successive lineages. Every cohort faced levies anew. Gradually, this whittled away at even the grandest accumulations. Together, these forces crippled the Gilded Age framework. Worker agitation diminished corporate gains. Personal levies seized a hefty share of the surplus. Legacy taxes blocked the intact transfer of estates to offspring. The mechanism that had fostered extreme wealth disparities was unraveling gradually. By 1915, the scene had transformed. Employees formed unions, walkouts proliferated, reformist measures advanced, levies rose steadily. The elite retained vast means. However, the direction was evident. Their dominance waned. The era of splendor drew to a close. Then war intervened. World War I hastened all these shifts: the manpower gaps, the fiscal burdens, the societal upheavals. The strife would remodel U.S. culture so profoundly that the Gilded Age could never revive. Even if the rich yearned to revive it, the conditions that enabled it had vanished. Chapter 10. World War I demolishes the facade. On August 19, 1914, Europe plunged into conflict. Archduke Franz Ferdinand slain in Sarajevo. Austria-Hungary targeted Serbia. Russia geared up. Germany pushed into Belgium. France joined. Britain trailed. In mere weeks, the landmass sank into humanity's bloodiest clash. The U.S. held back. President Wilson proclaimed impartiality. The strife belonged to Europe. Allow them to battle. America would proceed with normal commerce. Yet the turmoil altered all regardless. From afar across the ocean, World War I obliterated the realm that birthed the Gilded Age. And it unfolded in unforeseen manners. Initially, it eradicated European nobility, quite literally. Young British nobles volunteered as commanders and perished in the ditches. French upper crust forfeited heirs at Verdun. German royals succumbed at the Somme. Leadership roles drew heavily from noble backgrounds. They charged ahead. Casualties mounted hugely. The figures astounded. Britain suffered close to 750,000 losses. A full cohort gone. The peerage lay in ruins. Properties devolved to remote kin. Long-standing dynasties ceased. The hierarchy that withstood ages crumbled in 4 years, and that nobility served as the ideal U.S. tycoons pursued. Fifth Avenue residences echoed continental chateaus. Intricate societal customs echoed royal halls. American heiresses wed British peers for prestige. The entire edifice relied on European elites meriting emulation. Now those elites perished in Flemish sludge. Heirs of marquises endured in vermin-filled foxholes. Viscounts directed troops amid poison barrages. Barons vanished unnamed in communal tombs. The allure, the legacy of elegance. Nothing shielded them from rifles and barrages. U.S. upper classes observed and internalized the truth. Honors availed naught amid exploding ordnance. Heritage halted no projectiles. The continental nobility they admired stood exposed as fragile, human, not exalted figures, merely favored individuals born to the proper houses. The war further showed that states could achieve feats once deemed unattainable. Full-scale conscription, supply limits, cost caps, steep levies, conscript forces, directed production. The free market dynamics that spawned Gilded Age riches paused. State security demanded oversight, and it succeeded. France, Britain, and later the U.S. restructured their systems for armament output. Authorities steered workers, distributed materials, managed rates. The market's unseen guidance yielded to overt bureaucratic direction. And civilizations endured, they evolved, this upended doctrinal confidence. If states could manage output in battle, why not oversee it in tranquility? If levies could surge to support armaments, why not sustain them for welfare initiatives? The war validated state involvement. That eroded every plea for boundless enterprise. Upon U.S. involvement in April 1917, the alterations intensified. The state required funds. Personal levy brackets skyrocketed. The highest tier hit 77% by 1918. Income levy yields jumped from about $37 million in 1914 to almost $1 billion in 1918. The state also sought workers. Females flooded into plants in vast numbers, filling roles once held by males. They demonstrated their capability. They attained financial autonomy. Women gained independence during the war. They realized they no longer required husbands or fathers to manage their earnings. As the conflict concluded, numerous females resisted reverting to their former subordinate roles. This shift impacted household staff profoundly. Young ladies who had served as domestics found they could secure higher wages in ammunition plants. Although hazardous, the jobs offered superior compensation compared to domestic service. Most importantly, once their workday finished, they were free. They could return home, enjoy solitude, and pursue personal interests. Having experienced such autonomy, resuming servitude became unbearable. The scarcity of domestic aids escalated rapidly. Households that once effortlessly hired 30 or 40 servants now struggled to employ even 10. Salaries for such roles rose, yet they failed to match the allure of industrial earnings and liberty. The long-standing servant shortage intensified sharply. Consequently, grand estates grew increasingly impractical. Maintaining a 50-room mansion demanded a sizable team for essential upkeep. Lacking that support, properties fell into disrepair. Unused chambers accumulated dust. Overall standards dropped. Families wandered through vast residences they could no longer sustain adequately. The war also altered American perspectives on flaunting riches. With youths perishing in France, hosting extravagant gatherings appeared distasteful. Officials promoted moderation. Essential supplies had to prioritize aiding soldiers. Ostentatious spending struck many as disloyal. Social life persisted, but in a more restrained manner. Galas shrank in scale. Invitee numbers dwindled. Menus grew simpler, not due to mandates but societal expectations. Lavishness turned from admirable to awkward. The principles fueling Gilded Age rivalries, like staging the grandest soirees, erecting the biggest homes, or amassing the finest gems, abruptly felt insignificant. The mental transformation ran deep. A cohort of youth matured amid the turmoil. They observed nobility perish. They witnessed states effectively directing markets. They watched females demonstrate their competence. They viewed opulent exhibitions as profligate. Post-ceasefire, this group rejected the prior order. They sought alternatives. Returning soldiers in particular spurned outdated norms. Exposed to atrocities, bereft of comrades and confronted with mechanized carnage, they returned to a homeland where affluent clans inhabited opulent halls while laborers toiled in hardship. And it rang false. Numerous ex-servicemen grew politicized, some aligned with union efforts, others backed leftist politicians. Having battled for liberty overseas, they demanded its application domestically. The 1917 Russian uprising horrified U.S. upper classes. The Tsar deposed, nobles slain, assets confiscated, Bolsheviks ascendant. If upheaval struck Russia, why not America? The similarities were stark. Vast disparities in wealth, detached elites ignoring ordinary folk, laborers driven to exhaustion. Russia had erupted. The U.S. could follow suit. This anxiety prompted certain prosperous lineages to embrace measured changes, preferable to concede elevated levies and oversight than court insurrection. Wiser to curb extravagance than incite the populace. Survival necessitated adjustment. Yet some responded with hostility. They accused foreign provocateurs. They insisted worker discontent stemmed from red saboteurs, not valid complaints. They endorsed suppressing extremists. They opposed all progress. Such opposition lingered into the 1920s, though it resembled a feudal stand. The tide had turned. Moreover, the war interrupted the cross-Atlantic exchange of culture. For years, Americans had acquired European artifacts. Combat halted such transactions. Continental households faced graver issues than auctioning artworks. Galleries stalled. Collectors in the U.S., accustomed to expanding holdings, encountered depleted supplies. More significantly, the dynamic evolved. Once the newcomers, Americans purchased sophistication from cultured Europe. But post-war, the nation stood as a lender. Owed vast sums by European states, billions in debt, the balance of influence flipped. No longer did Americans harbor feelings of inadequacy. They had rescued Europe. Such contributions commanded esteem. Upon the November 1918 truce, America had evolved, more forward-thinking in governance, equitable in society, and interventionist in finance. Females had cast ballots in certain states and advocated for nationwide enfranchisement. Unions gained power, state apparatus expanded, revenue burdens rose. The era of 1870, when Gilded Age wealth started piling up, had vanished. The premises justifying unchecked fortune hoarding lay in ruins. Authorities could shape markets. Nobility held no innate edge. Women might labor and ballot. Employees could unionize. Stark divides in prosperity posed risks. The elite clans that fashioned Fifth Avenue chateaus confronted a novel nation. Their estates appeared relics of the past, their habits passé, their principles antiquated. They might persist unchanged, but only by denying the truth. The base had fractured. The edifice. The mansion's condition was precarious, and it wouldn't be long before it began to collapse. Chapter 11. When the successors found it unaffordable. In 1926, Cornelius Vanderbilt III took ownership of his grandfather's grand estate. He had no interest in keeping it. Located at 5th Avenue and 57th Street, the property was breathtaking. Spanning 130 rooms across a full city block, it stood as Manhattan's biggest private home. Construction back in 1882 had run over $3 million. This structure embodied the height of Gilded Age extravagance, yet it demanded $30,000 each year just for property taxes. Factor in heating, power, routine upkeep, and coverage, and the total upkeep topped $100,000 annually. Residing there full-time called for hiring no fewer than 30 servants. That pushed labor expenses to another $100,000 or higher. By ordinary measures, Cornelius III was quite affluent, yet even he couldn't shoulder the burden of that residence. In truth, no one could anymore. The financial landscape had shifted dramatically. His forebear, Cornelius II, had thrived in a time without income taxes. All earnings stayed in pocket. Building riches was simple. Earn it, hold on to it, acquire real estate. Come 1926, the highest tax rate on income reached 25%. It had spiked to 77% amid the recent war and would climb further soon. But at 25%, it still meant surrendering a fourth of one's earnings to the state before covering anything else. Estate duties only worsened matters. Upon Cornelius II's passing, his assets transferred with scant levies. In the 1920s, however, inheritance taxes devoured large chunks of passed-down fortunes. The capital that bankrolled the mansion's erection simply couldn't be matched by descendants grappling with today's levies. The availability of domestic workers posed an equally daunting challenge. Prior to the war, securing skilled help for the home was straightforward. Fresh arrivals from abroad sought jobs. Though wages were low, such roles provided steady work. After the war, though, options multiplied. Manufacturing jobs offered superior pay. Shop work brought greater independence. Far fewer individuals wanted to toil as live-in aides. Those who did expected steeper compensation. Market forces tipped the scales their way. Securing a valet, maid, and sufficient personnel meant shelling out top dollar, yet vacancies persisted. The figures simply didn't add up. Upholding a Fifth Avenue estate might require $250,000 per year. After taxes, generating that sum demanded far greater pre-tax income. It called for a vast estate yielding hefty returns. Even so, much of that wealth would vanish into sustaining a single dwelling. Cornelius III reviewed the ledger and chose wisely. Divest. The property fetched $7 million from Bergdorf Goodman. They coveted the plot, not the edifice. Soon after, the mansion faced the wrecking ball. He wasn't the only one facing this dilemma. Along Fifth Avenue, parallel reckonings unfolded. Andrew Carnegie's widow parted with his residence in 1926. The place was scarcely 27 years old. Designed for generations, it endured under 3 decades. The Astor estates were razed. The Frick mansion met the same fate. The opulent Clark residence, built at a cost of $7 million over 7 years, came down in 1927. Gradually, these icons of Gilded Age opulence vanished. The lineages letting go weren't destitute. Plenty stayed prosperous, but prosperity alone fell short. Preserving such chateaux demanded exceptional means, and more, the outlay proved unjustifiable, even for the affluent. A few attempted modifications. They sealed off sections, confined themselves to select chambers, trimmed the household to essentials. Yet occupying a 50-room behemoth with only 5 aides guaranteed decay. Spaces grew cold without heat. Drips lingered unfixed. Quality slipped away. These structures needed complete crews or they crumbled. Some explored repurposing, transforming into rentals, workplaces, or social venues. But the designs resisted adaptation. Chambers were oversized, configurations overly bespoke. Wiring and pipes were antiquated. Retrofitting expenses outstripped tearing down and starting fresh. Skyrocketing lot prices sealed the demolition's destiny regardless. A Fifth Avenue parcel commanded millions, provided it supported income-generating development. A single-family manor produced zilch in revenue. Conversely, a multi-unit tower sheltering scores of households or a business complex with stores and suites yielded solid profits. The fiscal rationale was irresistible. Offload the site, level the manor, erect something contemporary. Builders shelled out handsomely, aware of the gains ahead. The clans acquiesced, knowing retention spelled gradual ruin. The sentimental toll was profound. These weren't mere structures. They were ancestral abodes, sites of childhoods, nuptials, and lineages spanning generations. Parting with them signaled the close of an age, the fade of familial splendor. Certain heirs battled to retain them. They took loans, postponed repairs, pressed forward amid hardship, but most yielded in time. The fiscal pressures were unrelenting. You couldn't sustain Gilded Age man discussions about Gilded Age fortunes, often overlook those post-era incomes. Once underway, the teardowns proceeded at a rapid pace. Demolition teams managed to dismantle a grand residence in mere weeks. The intricate limestone exteriors, which had required years of meticulous craftsmanship, were reduced to debris. Lavish inner spaces were stripped bare. Certain decorative features were preserved and auctioned to enthusiasts or institutions. The bulk ended up in dumps. Images from that period capture the eerie spectacle of these opulent structures being razed. Facades punctured, walls toppled, ceilings caved in amid once refined exteriors. The sharp disparity between the edifice's splendor and their brutal dismantling was unmistakable. Structures that demanded years to erect vanished in days. New York experienced this shift, but it wasn't unique. Comparable developments unfolded elsewhere. Chicago's lavish homes were leveled. Philadelphia's properties changed hands. Newport's summer retreats endured a bit more favorably, as they served as seasonal getaways rather than permanent dwellings. Yet even in those spots, numerous ones were torn down or allowed to decay. The swiftness of this evolution stunned onlookers. In 1890, Fifth Avenue boasted a row of stately homes. By 1930, nearly all had vanished. A mere 40 years separated their rise from their fall. Edifices meant to endure for generations lasted less than half that span. What emerged in their place revealed a broader narrative. Retail outlets, corporate towers, residential complexes, and businesses welcoming all who could pay. The once segregated elite enclave evolved into a blended zone. Open entry supplanted secluded status. The altered cityscape mirrored evolving societal norms. A select few residences persisted. Henry Clay Frick's abode transformed into a museum, just as he had envisioned. His spouse resided there until 1931. Afterward, the Frick collection welcomed visitors. It endures as one of the premier compact museums globally. Andrew Carnegie's estate outlasted many others, only to be removed in 1940. Prior to that, it had sat idle for more than 10 years. No purchaser emerged. Upkeep proved impossible. Ultimately, the site's worth made emptiness untenable. These holdouts were anomalies. The Cooper Hewitt Museum now inhabits Andrew Carnegie's old property on 91st Street, another Carnegie dwelling that was repurposed instead of destroyed. The Museum of the City of New York claims a former mansion site. Several more shifted into social clubs or public entities, though the overwhelming number faded away. The spot of the Vanderbilt mansion now hosts Bergdorf Goodman. The Astor Residence's locations house business properties. Traces of the Gilded Age's physical legacy largely evaporated. The structures that once proclaimed affluence so boldly fell quiet. Beyond mere architectural erasure, the destruction signified the close of a financial order, a class hierarchy, and a period where boundless riches could be amassed and lavish private estates sustained. The successors weren't inept. They merely navigated altered circumstances. Eras marked by steeper levies, escalated expenses, shifting priorities. Periods where devoting $250,000 yearly to a single property appeared extravagant, not praiseworthy. Moments when fiscal constraints rendered such outlays unviable, even among the affluent. The Gilded Age had raised its icons, only for subsequent fiscal and cultural shifts to render them untenable. The grand homes were felled not by calamity or intentional sabotage, but because sustaining them grew beyond reach. Chapter 12. Demolition and Endurance. The 1920s and 1930s reshaped Fifth Avenue irreparably. In places where French chateaux once loomed, sleek Art Deco spires ascended. Sites that private estates dominated across full blocks now sheltered multifamily dwellings for countless households. The avenue, emblematic of Gilded Age extravagance, morphed into a bustling commercial artery. The design aesthetic of the successors narrates its tale. Art Deco embodied modernity with streamlined forms, angular motifs, and échoual of bygone ornamentation. These structures avoided mimicking continental castles. They declared their identity as distinctly American and current, forward-looking rather than nostalgic. Bergdorf Goodman's fresh structure on the Vanderbilt plot debuted in 1928, sophisticated yet mercantile. Entry awaited anyone with funds. Social pedigree unnecessary. No need for invitations or networks. Simply step inside and purchase. The shift toward inclusivity reached fruition. Where the elite's 400 had convened, multitudes now wandered the aisles. The co-op supplanting additional mansions mirrored this trend. Developments such as 740 Park Avenue, finished in 1930, accommodated prosperous clans. Rather than a lone household claiming an entire block, scores coexisted within one edifice. They divided the prestige of the locale, the entrances, the personnel. The profound seclusion of Gilded Age estates dissolved. These units remained opulent, spacious chambers, lofty vaults, refined accents, yet they functioned as apartments. No longer did residents command 30 dedicated servants. The structure supplied porters, repairs, upkeep. Operations turned collective and streamlined, curbing excess, aligning better with contemporary demands. The financial rationale proved unavoidable. A multifamily tower yielded revenue for proprietors while delivering practical shelter. Or inhabitants. The property was utilized effectively. Rental revenues could handle the tax burdens. These edifices supported themselves monetarily in manners that standalone grand homes could never achieve. However, not all were torn down. Certain Gilded Age edifices endured by shifting their roles. They evolved into museums, social clubs, educational facilities, or cultural hubs. To persist, they needed to invite the public inside, Exclusive estates morphed into communal assets. The Frick collection debuted in 1935. Henry Clay Frick had envisioned this outcome. His residence was crafted with the future goal of displaying his artworks. Following his widow's passing in 1931, the property and its holdings passed to a trust. Modifications prepared the space for public exhibition. It welcomed guests who previously would have been barred from entry. Strolling through the Frick nowadays evokes stepping into a Gilded Age estate preserved in amber. The artworks Frick amassed continue to adorn the walls. The furnishings endure. The interiors are laid out largely as they were during his occupancy. Yet now, entry is open to all. Purchase a ticket, and you step into a realm once utterly secluded. The Morgan Library took a comparable route. J.P. Morgan's private study transformed into a public institution after his son gifted it in 1924. Expansions occurred, yet the core essence remained intact. The priceless volumes, documents, and pieces Morgan gathered now await researchers and sightseers alike. Such establishments safeguarded not merely the structures, but whole treasuries of items. The masterpieces hoarded by these tycoons didn't disappear. Instead, they gained widespread availability. Paradoxically, their amassed riches ultimately benefited society in ways the barons themselves seldom considered during their lifetimes. Additional residences turned into exclusive societies. Think of the University Club or the Metropolitan Club. Nonprofits acquired the properties and repurposed them. Now, groups of members occupy the lavish spaces rather than solitary households, still selective, yet fulfilling wider roles beyond a single family's needs. Others shifted to academies or arts venues. The structure, now home to the Museum of the City of New York, began as a personal dwelling. The Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum resides in Andrew Carnegie's former home on 91st Street. These venues gained renewed vitality through instructional missions. Yet these holdouts proved rare. For each residence reinvented, a dozen met the wrecking ball. Most Gilded Age designs simply faded away. Neighborhoods once filled with homes turned into business districts. This urban shift echoed the societal upheaval. In Newport, conservation unfolded otherwise. Those Rhode Island summer retreats lasted because they served as secondary getaways, not everyday homes. Maintenance expenses, though hefty, proved feasible for affluent clans who visited sporadically, and over time, numerous were bequeathed to the Preservation Society of Newport County. Presently, sightseers explore the Breakers, Marble House, and fellow Newport estates. They wander chambers that once echoed with elite gatherings. They witness the extravagance up close. These dwellings operate as exhibits, educating guests on a bygone epoch from 100 years past. The drive for heritage protection arose in part from observing Fifth Avenue's losses. With estate after estate vanishing, advocates realized that built heritage was slipping away. Groups emerged to protect key landmarks. Legislation for safeguarding history followed, though arriving too tardily for the bulk of Gilded Age relics. What persisted in New York chiefly involved sites backed by formal entities, museums, archives, associations equipped with funds to uphold them, and strong motives for retention. Solo lineages couldn't uphold such opulent domains, but endowed bodies with community backing managed it. The raised estates bequeathed scant remnants. Occasionally, features like entrances, fireplaces, or woodwork got rescued. These found new homes in galleries or alternative sites, but the originals themselves evaporated entirely. Often, even images prove elusive. The edifices stood briefly, leaving sparse records. Such obliteration proved strikingly complete. A modern stroller along Fifth Avenue spots virtually no traces of the Gilded Age. The constructions have departed. The lineages behind them linger as mere historical asides. The elite framework that propped it up has dissolved. Solely the narratives endure. The Art Deco towers supplanting those homes now hold landmark status themselves. Consider the Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building, or Rockefeller Center. These icons from the 1920s and 1930s shape the city's silhouette. They embody fresh ideals. Enterprise might over personal fortunes, contemporary forms over past revivals, trade over seclusion. In essence, the successors feel more inclusive. Multitudes labor within skyscrapers. A lone clan occupied each mansion. The terrain accommodates greater numbers. The designs prioritize utility. The influence reaches wider. Judge so, the evolution marked advancement. Still, irreplaceable elements vanished. The artistry, the substances, the bold vision of erecting a personal fortress. In a bustling contemporary metropolis, those opulent Gilded Age estates stood as extravagant symbols of extravagance and disparity. Yet they also represented remarkable feats of craftsmanship. The craftsmanship and dedication poured into their construction are irreplaceable today. Today's financial realities render such grand edifices unfeasible. Even today's ultra-wealthy individuals shy away from erecting sprawling 100-room city residences. Expenses have skyrocketed. Reliable servants are scarce. Tax burdens are overwhelming. Public opinion now frowns upon such ostentatious shows of affluence. The unique blend of financial conditions and societal norms that enabled these Gilded Age homes has faded away. Thus, we cherish the rare survivors, the Fick, the Morgan Library, the Newport cottages, portals to a bygone era, meticulously maintained relics from a time over 100 years past. These sites offer glimpses into the lavish lifestyles of the elite back then. They also underscore a profound truth. Nothing, however enduring it appears, truly lasts forever. The Gilded Age erected its lavish landmarks. But then, evolving markets, cultural shifts, and changing priorities led to the downfall of most. The demolition crews that razed Vanderbilt estates in the 1920s didn't just topple structures. They shattered an entire societal order, a financial framework, and a lifestyle that had felt invincible, yet turned out to be surprisingly vulnerable. What persisted did so through adaptation, by welcoming visitors, by fulfilling wider roles. Exclusive retreats turned into communal treasures and thrived. Those that clung to private exclusivity disappeared. Perhaps that's the ultimate takeaway. Riches that hoard themselves eventually dissipate. Estates benefiting solely their proprietors scatter. Homes sheltering just one household face the bulldozer. Yet assets channeled toward communal good can weather the ages. The amassed artworks, the book repositories, the exhibition halls, these enduring gifts outlived the wealth that amassed them. The Gilded Age drew to a close. Its grand homes crumbled, its hierarchical world unraveled, only to reinvent itself as inclusive establishments for all. Portions of its legacy persist, not as tributes to opulence, but as tools for education, not as secluded indulgences, but as collective inheritance. Though the era concluded, its repurposed and accessible fragments endure.